Now, I've talked at some length about Karl Marx and the strategy of class warfare, and that Marx succeeded like no others at developing the populist appeal, the proletariat or the people versus the bourgeois or the entrenched wealthy class. We've talked about this at length. And I explained last week that Obama views himself as standing for the proletariat, which he characterizes as the middle class. Obama understands, as did Marx, that capitalism promotes competition, which means there are individuals and groups of individuals, such as corporations, that can become very, very successful. And by attacking the successful, Obama, like Marx, can tap into negative human emotions, such as envy and resentment and even anger. And this is the course Obama is brazenly traveling today. The fact is that capitalism has led to the most advanced, successful society for the most people that mankind has ever known. Capitalism does in fact spread the wealth, but it does so based on voluntary behavior and interactions. But, it also creates wealth. Creates the wealth that undergirds our economy. Government does not create wealth. It destroys wealth. And when government spreads the wealth, it does so based on the political calculations of a few uninformed officials. And it does so under the threat of fines and imprisonment for the rest of us. Now, to use Marx's terminology, the proletariat outnumber the bourgeois. So the constant focus must be to demonize the bourgeoisie. And in truth, the bourgeoisie changes to meet the political and propaganda needs of Obama and his ilk. That is, it's flexible. They move people and groups into different categories at will. For instance, the definition of wealthy is flexible. A millionaire today is a small business that grosses $250,000 a year. And you're supposed to hate those businesses. You're supposed to hate management as fat cats, so Obama underscores this by attacking their salary packages and bonuses, even though their impact is of absolutely no consequence to the economy or the rest of us. Meanwhile, the Marxist preaches utopia. Government-run health care, they claim, will make certain that everyone who needs a doctor, surgery, medicine, etc., no matter their pre-existing conditions, will receive it at minimal cost or no cost. There will be no rationing that puts costs above medical treatment. No insurance bureaucrats denying you whatever you want or need. Who can oppose any of this, right? And yet we know that the exact opposite is true. Or the Marxist today talks about so-called green jobs. What's a green job? You can't really define it. But the promise of purity of air and water, cheap and infinite energy by way of the sun and wind, and high-paying jobs to work at all these things is very alluring. And of course, but for the oil companies and special interests who obstruct such a wonderful environment, this would be possible. Right? So you're encouraged to hate oil companies and the use of land and water and natural resources as exploitation of the common good. Look at this nirvana, but look at these people and entities stopping us. The Marxist claims to stand with the people, but in none of its manifestations does Marxism benefit the people. It enslaves the people, either in the form of a hard tyranny or a soft tyranny. Individual liberty, self-sufficiency, and independence are the enemies of Marxism, and they are the constant target of governmental abuse. Saul Alinsky, a Chicago Marxist who was part of the intelligentsia, the so-called New Left movement, he sought to apply Marx to the streets of America, in particular Chicago. That's what his book, Rules for Radicals, was intended to address. It was written in 1971, during the height of the anti-war movement, which many of the New Left leaders had hoped would overthrow our society. Now, Alinsky celebrated and despised the middle class, and it's important to understand this because one of his finest students is Barack Obama. Alinsky believed the middle class was materialistic and decadent and degenerate and corrupt and imperialistic. But he added, we must, and I quote, we must bring from where we are if we are to build power for change. And the power and the people are in the big middle class majority. So Obama has gone back to Alinsky. He knows he has to try to impress upon most of us that he stands with us, that his policies are intended to help us, and that he will lead us against the forces of suppression, the banks and so forth. And he does this because he must deflect public scorn from the consequences of his own central planning blunders. He has sabotaged the private sector and then blames the private sector for the predictable outcomes, higher unemployment, foreclosures, bankruptcies, etc. In addition to promoting a flawed ideology, an ideology that rejects the nature of man, Obama himself is a thoroughly flawed man. He's always scripted. That's why he requires teleprompters and refuses to hold more real press conferences. He has a superficial grasp of life and this society, for his experience prior to winning public office was thin, and his learning is more indoctrination than actual education. And Obama's a cold man. Sometimes it's confused with a cool demeanor, while his cool demeanor masks a cold, calculating individual with a massive ego, who has big schemes and plans regardless of the misery they would cost if they were effectively unleashed. His obsession with government-run health care, for example, has always been an obsession with self-aggrandizement. I, me. His lurch this week as leader of the middle class is born of political necessity, he believes, not human compassion. He wakes up one day and decides there's a middle class that needs help. And let me suggest, let me be among the few, if the only, to say, I don't buy this term middle class. It's born out of Marxism. America is a classless society where the poorest of poor can become the richest of rich. It's an imperfect society, but it is the most perfect society on the face of the earth. Perfection is not defined as absolute equality, since human beings are not absolutely equal in all that they do. They are equal in the sense that they have unalienable God-given rights to live and live freely and pursue their happiness. In that regard, they're equal before God. But equal outcomes, that is, hard tyranny, the most repressive and oppressive of government systems, is not what the founders meant when they talked about equality. Otherwise, they celebrated inequality.